Boom. Flawless. We're streaming from 5 different outlets today, as usual, because we like choice and we like for people to be able to choose their schools. We like people to be able to choose their streaming outlet, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, or my Twitter account. But today I'm really excited because we're with Jeff Kwitowski. He has some new information to share with us on the virtual charter school debate in the United States today. And Jeff Kwitowski is actually with K12 Inc. So I'm really excited to share some of this information or have Jeff share this information with all the listeners. So since we have so much to talk about, Matthew, want to get into the formal introductions, and then we can jump into it?
Yeah, let's start. So I'm Matt Nielsen. I'm the founder and board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute. We have Corey DeAngelis. I'm going to interrupt my introductions right now just to acknowledge Tilly. Tilly is a strong advocate of virtual learning. And Jeff, you must know Tilly.
Yeah, we've crossed paths a few times. Now I'm super nervous because if I say something wrong, she is the mother hen of virtual charter school families, and nobody does it better.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, I'll pick back up where I left off. So Corey DeAngelis is the executive director at EFI. He's also the director of school choice at the Reason Foundation and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Our special guest today is Jeff Kwitowski. He's the senior vice president of public affairs and policy communications at K12 Inc. And we appreciate you coming on today, Jeff.
Oh, it's great for joining us, Corey. Good to see you again.
Yeah. So today is all things virtual schools, and we're going to talk about, yes, everyone's sick of it, but we're going to talk about how the pandemic has affected virtual schools, because we haven't talked about that specifically. We've talked about homeschooling and some other things like that, but I think this is a good chance for us to just sit down and chat about that. We'll talk a little about what the future looks like, and then some breaking news from Jeff. We'll get to that too. So let's just start, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little about yourself, and how you got involved in education and what your interest in it was and is.
Yeah. So a couple of things. People who know me know 2 things about me. One, I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I'm a huge Bills and Sabres fan. That's number one. Number 2, I have a wife and 4 beautiful daughters. So I'm in a house full of women. So I've those are my 2 big passions in life. Probably my third then is education reform, and specifically empowering parents with more choices, more access, more options, more freedom. And I've been doing this now at K12 for about 16 years. And honestly, I never thought that I would be at one place, let alone K12, for as long as I've been. I got to Washington, D.C. right after college, jumped right into the world of government relations and advocacy, worked for a few organizations, and then spent 4 years at an organization called Empower America, which at that time was led by Jack Kemp and Bill Bennett, former education secretary under Reagan. And boy, did I learn a lot from those 2 guys. Just great champions of individual rights and freedom. And of course, both were passionate advocates for school choice. And I learned a ton and really sort of fell in love with this, viewed it as an issue that I felt like I could stay with for a long time. And then Bill at that time, while I was at Empower America, co-founded K12 with another guy named Ron Packard, who is the sort of entrepreneurial spirit and CEO for several years. And as Empower America was sort of waning, people were going to do different things. I said, I'll give it a shot. I'll try the private sector, and if it doesn't work out, I'll move off into the world of public policy, back and maybe work on the Hill or something like that. The company was a startup phase when I jumped in 2003. And so it was very aggressive and moving forward, doing some things that, nobody really thought even possible. And so I started working with them, and 16 years later, here I am still. I tell you, one of the things I really do love about K12 and the work that we do is we are very mission oriented. This is a company that has developed some incredible products, no question. The technology and the curriculum, it is exceptional stuff, and they continue to be innovative and do more of these types of things. But they're not just selling products. We're selling opportunity for families as well too, and that's what I love about it. Every single person that's been a part of the company, leading the company, and today it's our CEO is Nate Davis, president of schools and policy, Kevin Chavis, who many people in the education reform school choice community know very well. They're leading the company right now, along with several others. But they've always had a very mission-oriented drive, and everybody, can really unite around that. So it's what we really, why I wake up, why I do what I do, and I'm really proud to be able to stand with my colleagues, and it even more so when I get to be able to spend time with the families, whether it's at graduation ceremonies or events, advocacy events, to be able to see the passion that they have for their schooling, their children. It gives me a lot of pride. So that's a little bit of my background, a little bit about what we do. But again, K12 as a company is the leading provider of online education. We work with charter schools, we work with school districts, 2,000 school districts. In fact, that's something a lot of people don't really know. They think of it, they view us just simply as maybe working just with virtual charter schools. We do that, certainly, but we also work with school districts to offer multi-district online schools, in-district programs, and other innovative programs, blended school programs, supplemental offerings across the board. And as obviously COVID has hit, this has only just enhanced the need that school districts have to be able to provide online and blended learning options. And so we're really proud that we're positioned to be able to help serve them in this time of need.
So Jeff, for our listeners, what the heck is a virtual charter school, and how does that differ from, the crisis education that we're seeing that, district schools are doing right now? Because like a lot of school districts are providing some type of virtual education. Is that the same thing as like a virtual charter school? And could you just kind of go into the differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of terms used right now: virtual learning, online learning. If you've been around as I have for in the world of online learning for many years, there's a lot of folks who've been along with me who bristle at that because they know what quality online learning looks like. They know what full-time online schools do and how that differs from a lot of the crisis, emergency, remote learning that's taking place right now. Frankly, I'm experiencing that. I live in Fairfax. Our children are all in the Fairfax County Public Schools. And it's not news to everybody that they have struggled. They've been a large school district that has struggled, not because the teachers haven't tried and the administrators haven't done everything that they possibly can, but a lot of it was just the institution was not set up for success. They did not have the capacity to do that. So what is online charter schools? What are online charter schools? These are full service, comprehensive schools, grades K through 12. Every lesson, all subjects, all electives. In fact, in many cases, more electives than what can be offered in traditional schools. All the way through graduation. Counselors, advisors, full wraparound services, and of course, teachers. Excellent teachers. K12 works with over 6,000 teachers. These are teachers who have come. Most of them have come from the brick and mortar school. They've made that transition. I was just talking with some of the folks in our education team who said this year alone, they've trained nearly 1,200 new online school teachers and over 100 new school leaders. I was on Twitter exchanging with Michael Petrelli from Fordham, who asked about, who's doing online teaching, training, and so forth. And I called it sort of our heartbeat. It's what we do. We're training educators to be able to help in the schools that we serve. So these online charter schools are doing great work. And I think the biggest thing I would say that really distinguishes these schools from others is that they are one of the only public schools, if not the only public schools, that can provide an education and a choice to any student, regardless of where they live in a state. And we work with students who live in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas. And the stories you hear are amazing sometimes. I recall several years ago, one student who lived 10,000 feet up on top of a mountain in Colorado. Had the school bus wouldn't get them, couldn't get them.
Wow.
So they had no choice, no public school option. But when online charter schools began, they had an option. And I think that's what's great about this. For a lot of families, online charter schools are the only public school choice they have access to. And so we're very proud to be able to help fill a gap that exists within the choice community. We openly advocate for more choices, more options, more opportunities. But in a lot of states, even where there's some great brick and mortar charter schools, they may be located in certain areas. I know Fordham Foundation talked about charter school deserts. We call it the sort of the charter school accessibility gap. There's a lot of charter schools in a lot of states, but if you can't access a charter school, it's sort of meaningless to you as a parent, as a family member. So, we can do that. We can provide access to these families, and so many families do choose this because it is the only option. They're dealing with a crisis in their own family or their own student's life, and they can access this choice, and we do what we can to serve them.
Hey, so Jeff, it looks like Eric Casanzi's commenting on your beard. I wasn't going to comment on it. I did so backstage, but hey, I like it. You should keep it, man. You should keep the beard.
Yes, it is new. I figured if I'm coming on with you, Corey, I got to compete a little bit.
But yeah, I like that the background you gave, and what's also interesting to me is just how this ties into the pandemic, where the virtual charter schools are one of the few options that were virtually unaffected by the school closures, because they were already providing education from afar. Has K12 Inc. or other virtual charter school networks that you know of reported, any differences just in call volume or people enrolling in your in K12 schools? Or
yeah, Corey, great question. All of the above. And I know this isn't just the case with K12, but the schools that we serve, the district programs, the virtual charter school programs, they are seeing a higher number of interest and of enrollments, both for in-year. And this happened right around March, when everything started to really break. Around those first few weeks in March, there was a significant uptick in the number of families who called to see if they could get their student enrolled in the school, knowing or hearing that the school was already shut down. I mean, Kansas, I think maybe they were the first state, right, to say that they're going to close the school buildings for the remainder of the year. And then several other states followed. Virginia, I think, was number 2. And so, yeah, there were a lot of families that were asking, hey, can we get in and can we enroll into the school for the remainder of the year? And I know a lot of the schools that we work with were gracious and said, yes, we can do that. And even if they weren't going to get funded for it, even if they weren't going to get, even if they needed to build extra capacity, they did that. And then additionally, for next year, there has definitely been an increase. I think it was reported several weeks ago, about 16% higher. That was several weeks ago. It could be even more now. That's across all the schools that we serve. And I think most people are sensing that there could be, a higher number, not so much because of anything other than the fact that there's uncertainty. And I think for a lot of families, there's still nervousness about going back into crowded school buildings. The other point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just the other point that you made about the fact that what happened when schools closed, it really was interesting. It's sort of the eyes of public education sort of gravitated to online schools and said, you know what, here, these online charter schools, these multi-district online schools, they're still going. And I think there was a lot of confusion when people said, okay, we're shutting down schools, or schools are closed. In fact, this got really messy in the first early weeks, where governors or state education commissioners were saying schools are shut down. But online schools, full-time schools, were the only ones that were able to continue to operate. And they did. In some weird cases, they were actually told, even though you can operate, you still have to shut down, because we have to do it equally across the board. We fought to remedy that. in several states, and we did. But I think it was an important point. I mean, and this happens whether it's in Florida with some natural disasters, in California, other places. You can see there's continuity of learning that can take place in this model.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that, but in particular Pennsylvania. We need to talk about Oregon too. But first question: when you mentioned there's some group of people, there's some proportion of families that say, "Look, I'm not comfortable sending my kids back on day one. Maybe I'd send them back if things are looking good. I'd send them back maybe after the first quarter, or once things calm down, or whatever that looks like, right, for them." As I've thought through this and talked with other people about it, it seems like you have kind of, I want your thoughts on this, Jeff. You kind of have a few different groups of people. There's that group that say, I'm not coming back on day one, but I'll come back, but I'm not coming back on day one to a brick and mortar school, right? You have another group that says, I want out. I want back in as soon as you can get me back in. Like I'm totally comfortable today, right? So there's another section of people. And then the third section of people, I think, are the ones that are saying, I actually like the way that we did things, and I didn't know it could be so good. And I want to stick with it, and we're going to try it for a year, or we're going to try it for a semester, or whatever. So as you've talked through this with people that you're working with day to day, your colleagues, do you see another group out there? Does that sit well with what you're envisioning?
Yeah. Well, I'll try to directly address those groups that you talked about.
Yeah.
There are, and historically been, several families who will say, we just want to enroll temporarily. We may have a crisis in our family right now. We may have just moved, right? And there's reluctance for my middle schooler to go to this brand new school. We want to start here for a little bit until we transition back into the community. We may have a medical issue, a medical challenge that a family may be dealing with, or a student may have. And they're very explicit. We only want to enroll for a short period of time. That's great. Yep. That's why we support open enrollment year long, right? The ability for a family to choose mid-year if they want to transfer in or transfer out. Now, it's funny because a lot of people will say, well, that shows the instability of the model. That shows that this is a bad model. We need to restrict that because mobility is bad. And yeah, there is something to that. But once you start to sort of create policies like this, you have inhibited the ability for a parent to make a critical choice that they may not need to make for their child at a period of time that's not of their choosing, right? They can't choose when if their child gets sick, or if they've been bullied, or if there's negative socialization taking place at the school. So it
just recognizes the unpredictability of life, right? It doesn't
speak to move for whatever reason, right?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Mobility's bad, so we're going to make it illegal. Yeah. What's the alternative, right? I mean, that's the problem.
Right. And to your point about the then obviously with COVID, with coronavirus, we're expecting that to be a lot more. Where families are saying, look, until there's a vaccine, I just do not feel comfortable, whether it's because of the child has a autoimmune issue, or whether they're living with a grandparent, elderly grandparent, whatever it might be. The circumstances are going to vary completely. That's why I want to give the child, the family, as much freedom to make those choices and be able to move in and out as they need to. And then to your other point, are there families who are going to say that, you know what, I never did this online thing or this homeschool thing before, right? I was forced into it. But you know what? It actually is working. I actually have a good friend who I talked to whose child is excelling. And it's just, I don't want to go back to school, Dad. Not that they don't want to learn, but they want to stay at home because they're learning in a safer, better, way, an environment that works. So all of a sudden their parents' eyes are open to the fact that, wow, this could work. I never expected to be a homeschool family, right? Or a virtual school family, but this is working. So what options exist for me? In fact, the National Coalition of Public School Options just released a poll yesterday that talked about the fact that there was a surprisingly high number of families who were satisfied with the online learning experience. And then, of course, we saw the AFC poll and USA Today poll and others talking about the families are just really nervous about going back to schools, even if they're given a green light. So all of that sort of comes back around to the value of online learning and online schools. I talk about this a lot. I say, look, we never argue that one model is better than another in schooling. But the fabric of public education should be much more diverse and broad than it is now. And online charter schools and online multi-district online schools or blended programs are not going to take over traditional schools anytime soon. But they are an important piece. They're an important option. And that's why they should be supported, because they help meet the needs of certain families. And obviously in times like this, they're providing continuity of learning where the traditional schools were unable.
Well, and I mean, you're right. I like that you pointed out all the polls of, people suggesting that they're probably not going to go back to their brick and mortar schools for whatever reason. A lot of these numbers are pointing in the same direction and similar large sizes. I mean, you said about a 16% increase in demand. Arizona did a poll that Matthew shared just a week or two ago where 34% of families were saying they weren't going to send their kids back once the schools reopened. You have the AFC poll, the Ed Choice poll. And it could also be that parents don't want to send their kids back to schools that look like this. This one was from Arizona, and it was actually a charter school. But I mean, if you look at the comments on my threads on these kinds of pictures, the families are like, if that's what school's going to look like, I'm not going to send them back. I'll just keep them at home, and maybe I'll just enroll them in a free, a tuition-free public charter school option. That's a virtual school. But I really want to talk about just this thing that we hinted at a second ago. But just talk about how this war kind of unfolded as a result of the coronavirus school closure. It seemed to be, to me at least, and I tweeted about this all throughout, but Jeff, I think you've been on the front lines with all of this information about things going on in Oregon and Pennsylvania, where the monopoly has essentially realized that they might lose a lot of students because families might figure out that virtual schools are a good option. And what are some of the things on the ground that have been going on that you've noticed in different states?
Not just losing the students, but perhaps more importantly for the school districts, losing the funding. And I think what you saw, a very quick move in Pennsylvania to pass a law that would prevent online charter schools, or they call them cyber charter schools in Pennsylvania, from receiving funding for any new student that enrolls after, I think the date was maybe March 13th. Some of the schools defied that order, not defied it, I shouldn't say that. They said, whatever, we'll still take this. If the student still needs to come in, parent still wants them to come in, we'll do it even though we know we won't get the funding. But yeah, it was an aggressive move. And I think there was some very public statements, I think, made by representatives of school boards, associations, and others that they were afraid of losing funding. And so they wanted to cap that and prevent it. But, again, that kind of gets to who should have the power and the control for where they send it to be a school district, or should be the mom and dad. And then in Oregon, we saw the same thing as well, too, that they sort of retroactively said, we're not going to provide funding for new students. They amended that a little bit, and they said the students can still transfer, but they're not going to be able to get funding for the school. The funding will not flow to the school that's actually serving that child. And again, that was sort of
Jeff. At first, Oregon was saying something like you can't enroll any new students, right? They made it illegal for anyone to switch, right? Are you saying they switched that later on?
Yeah, I'm just you're jogging my memory a little bit. Yeah, what happened was there was some communication that came out that suggested that they were barring any students from enrolling into an Oregon virtual charter school mid-year, even though there was no law that would require that. The law allowed the families to be able to transfer mid-year. They did change that, sort of amended that. if you will, clarified it. But then they did say that there was going to be a holdout on the funding. So that even though a student transfers, the funding is going to stay with the resident district. I mean, as a matter of policy, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to continue to fund a school that's no longer has a student, right? I mean, it's sort of a simple concept, and it was something we've long supported for a long time. That's why we don't particularly, advocate for count dates, because what happens if the student transfers, then the bulk of the money stays with the resident district or the resident school and doesn't transfer out. If a student transfers out of K12 school that's using K12, they should be allowed to do that, and whatever school is serving them should receive that funding. But anyway, that's one thing. But we're also seeing in Oregon, and alluding to the point that you and I talked, or we talked to a little bit before, is that in the statute in Oregon, there is a cap on the number of students who can transfer to virtual charter schools for each district. It's a way to sort of, if you will, protect the districts from losing too many students, and that's set at 3%. Way back when, before online charter schools were allowed in Oregon, parents had to actually go to the resident school district and ask permission to be able to go to enroll it to an online charter school.
And it's not time bound or anything, right, Jeff?
I'm sorry?
It's not time bound or anything, right? So it's not like 3% each quarter, 3% each school year. It's like
there's no
3%.
There's no escalator. There's no like 3% and then it goes to 4% or 5%. It's just always 3%.
Yes, but again, even before that, it was even worse, because parents basically had to go to the school district and say, you got to give me permission to leave. And so, we worked very hard with a lot of other advocates, parent advocates and others, to get that altered and changed to give parents the freedom to be able to do that so they couldn't get blocked. But there was this 3% rule. And what happened is basically—
Jeez, what if McDonald's came out and lobbied to the government to make it illegal to lose 3% of their customers to Burger King within a year or indefinitely? You can't switch. You can't go anywhere else. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense from a monopoly protection standpoint.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, if McDonald's could do that, they'd probably be really happy about it. Similarly, I'm sure the government schools are super happy in Oregon about preventing so many kids from being able to switch. And so you're saying, Jeff, this was always on the books, and then now they're just making a fuss about it, or?
We're starting to hear that some school districts are starting to say, hey, we've hit that 3% limit, so we're going to no longer allow any more students from our school district to transfer to any virtual charter school in the state. And I think that sort of just shows, again, two things: that there is a higher interest that families have to go into an online school, a full-time online school, and then secondly, that there's some concern from school districts about losing that funding. So again, we'll have to continue to advocate. But look, caps, statutory caps, even caps by charter school authorizers that prevent families from enrolling exist in several states. And that's why we fight. That's why we do what we do. We try to provide more opportunities, because if you're that, if we were talking about in Oregon off air, we said if you have a school district, 10,000 students, 300 of them are enrolled in virtual charters, you're 301 in that list, and you're told you can't go for no other reason that we hit that cap. It doesn't have anything to do with the educational need of the child. It's just you're the unlucky 301st child. But what if that child,
even if there's plenty of space,
right,
and
capacity issues,
dealing with a severe bullying issue or a medical challenge, or what if that's the one who's a low income student who who's perhaps living with an elderly grandparent who's at greater risk of COVID. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons why, but then you're the unlucky one. So again, it kind of just gets back to the central reason why we do what we do, which is giving parents more power to be able to make decisions that they believe are best for their child. I want to give you one statistic, because I want to point out one thing to you, because it's a sort of a characteristic of online charter schools that not a lot of people know, and it's this: most of the families who enroll for non-academic reasons do so for safety concerns. It shouldn't be a huge concern or surprise for somebody like you, Corey, and Matthew, who've been studying this for a long time. But safety is the number one non-academic reason why parents are choosing online charter schools. The Oklahoma State Virtual Charter School Board commissioned a study back in 2018, showed just that. That was the primary reason why parents chose online charter schools, and specifically because of bullying. And so, that characteristic is sort of unique to online charter schools, I believe, because it is the one model that allows a student to be removed from perhaps an environment that is hurting them, both perhaps from learning, but even from socialization. I talk about socialization. You can have positive or negative socialization. So that is an important part to consider. And to think now, all the schools across the nation were shut down because of health and safety concerns. So, sort of a microcosm of kind of how what online charter schools deal with often, with families in crisis who are looking for an option, who need an option, and have nothing else that they can choose from a public education offering, except for online charter schools and online multi-district online schools.
I think it's all.
Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out with your example of like 300 students, with the 3% rule. If you're the 301st student and you want to get out of that school, whether it's because it's unsafe or whatever reason of what's going on in your residentially assigned school, if you're a rich family, you're much more likely, if you're that 301st student, to be able to get out of that dangerous scenario or the school that's just not, teaching you well or whatever the reason may be. If you're a low-income student, if you're from a wealthy family, you can afford to pay for a private school. But, this rule disproportionately harms low-income families because virtual charter schools are the tuition-free option, right? And so that's another angle to consider, that these rules.
There's no prohibition for them to go to another school district. There's no prohibition for them to attend another public school.
So they can lose 3% of their students to another government school, and it's okay.
There's no prohibition for them to go to a private school or to a homeschool.
Yeah.
The school district will still lose that funding, but God forbid they choose a virtual charter school.
Yeah.
You almost can't make this stuff up, especially at a time when schools kept closed down and online charters were the only operating public schools serving students and doing so, quite well through that transition. And again, this isn't just, these are schools that have full teacher support, wraparound services, the whole thing. And so, it's not as if this is some, a program that is not a part of the public education system. These are schools that are equal to any other school, but they're often, and I'll say it, discriminated against because I think in part because of the fact that they do provide this ability to expand choice to communities and to families who otherwise wouldn't have it.
Well,
I can't say that enough because it is so powerful. It transforms everything. You're taking school and delivering it to the child. You're taking school choice and delivering it to the family. The family doesn't have to go move to access choice. The family doesn't have to hope and pray they're going to get a brick and mortar charter school in a place that's accessible to them. They can access that wherever they are. And to your point about the low income families, this is the other thing that's unique about online charter schools. They tend to serve a much higher percentage of economically disadvantaged families than the state averages. So the types of families that are being impacted by caps, restrictions, enrollment requirements that force them to be able to have to go to the school district or to even authorizers, perhaps even sometimes hostile authorizers who don't like the model and wish the model would be removed completely from the charter sector. It impacts disproportionately low income families.
Can you talk about the authorization process? Like of course, Matthew and I understand what you're talking about, but for listeners, What does that mean? What are you saying, that a charter school can't just open and people can choose it? The government has to give you permission, or what does that process look like? And could you talk maybe? Yeah, go ahead.
Types of authorizers, everything from school districts to independent authorizers to universities to state agencies. But I think one of the things that has happened within the course of charter authorizing is, there's a lot of different things. You could almost have a whole separate show about that, and you probably will at some point. But it can create different dynamics. Some of it being, and the way it should be, is that an authorizer is supportive of the schools in which it's authorizing, supportive and helpful and trying to be there at side by side, working collaboratively for the benefit of the school, the teachers, and the students and families in that. But oftentimes there are situations where authorizers can be hostile to the very schools in which they oversee, and that sets up just a terrible relationship, a terrible marriage. I mean, we've seen this from the get-go, where some would say we can do charters, but they would only have to be authorized by school districts. And then we know that
it's again like McDonald's saying that in order for a new Burger King location to open up, McDonald's has to give it a thumbs up.
The fox is guarding the hen house.
Yes, exactly.
Take certain models, and usually just online charter schools, and put them under a single authorizer who may be hostile to that model itself, where the board could be, the people that work within that state agency could be, and that just sets up a really bad situation, and it doesn't really create what you need to have successful partnership, which is really what chartering should be about. But again, that trickles all the way down to the impact on families. And when you think about access, you think about opportunity. Whether it's enrollment restrictions, enrollment limits, enrollment criteria. Some have been arguing that only certain types of students should be allowed into online schools, and we should predetermine that. And then if they don't meet that criteria, they can't be let in. I think that's terrible policy, but it's one that's been advanced but that would have terrible impacts on, again, kids who've been bullied, low-income families, and whatnot. Because if we're just about self-selecting students to figure out where they're going to go to school, then we may not have charter schools at all.
This is a good opportunity, I think, to at least touch on the Credo study.
Yeah,
for a second.
Bring that up.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, I'm sure you get this a lot. I get it a lot. What is your response to the people that say, "Oh, well, there was a study by Stanford researchers at Credo, and Tom Wolf likes to cite it a lot, and he's the governor of Pennsylvania, that says virtual schools aren't as good as, brick and mortar schools or traditional government schools. So we shouldn't let people choose virtual schools." What's your response to that?
Well, I'm not an academic researcher. I do respect a lot of the work that Credo has done. And when they put their report out several years ago about virtual charter schools, I think our response was a bit mixed, right? There's a lot there to look at, a lot there we need to be reflective about. And there was a lot of good work that was done. There were some things that we had some problems with, some of the methodology. Most importantly, sort of the lack of controlling for mobility. And the concern that we had that a lot of the virtual twinning, trying to compare one student versus another, doesn't take into account a lot of different other characteristics of the student, the background, the social issues that might be dealing with, right, and the why they chose, right. People do not leave schools if they're doing okay in those schools, if they're doing well in those schools generally. And especially true for online charter schools. They usually leave because of a crisis situation. And it's hard to twin that, right? It's hard to find a perfect match to that. That said, we do know that there has been historically challenges with state test results. Now, I will say this. There's a lot of folks I think even in the ed reform movement, who would define quality very narrowly, looking specifically and only at state test results.
So out of touch.
Everything else. And you can boil it down to how do they do on the state summative grade and how do they do on grad rate. And that's a challenge for a model like online charter schools that have a lot of different dynamics and a lot of different characteristics to them. But grad rate being one of them, the fact that these schools tend to take on a significantly high number of transfer students at the high school level who are not on track to graduate in that 4-year. But as you know, once that student moves to the new school, whether they move there the junior year or senior year, it's the new school that assumes the full responsibility for that student's grad rate. The school that they left, who they may have been with for a long period of time and didn't gain enough credits, is sort of off the hook. That's why we advocate for policy of progress toward graduation, where every year would count versus just a 4-year cohort. But that does disproportionately impact schools with high mobility, like online charter schools, who serve academically at-risk students who are often credit deficient. And as far as the state test scores are concerned, I think there's another characteristic to it that hasn't really been studied, and it probably should be. But it gets to how online charter schools and online schools have to administer state testing. A lot of people don't know this. It's probably one of the most underreported stories around online schools. And believe me, I've seen every single story about online schools that you could possibly imagine, written by the education writers and so forth. But the way in which online schools have to administer state tests would make school districts go berserk. They have to carve out 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks and set up remote locations all across the state. Instruction is completely interrupted. Teachers have to basically, drive or live sometimes in hotels over periods of times. Families have to drive sometimes 30, 40, 60 miles to get to these testing sites, putting their 3rd, 4th, 5th grade kids into sites that maybe they've never been in before, around people they've never been in before, and told to take a state test proctored by teachers. It is a logistical nightmare. And as every person who's been in traditional schools knows, state testing, they try to keep it as normal a school day as possible. It gets on the bus, goes in, maybe takes a state test, does some recess, lunch, another test, back home. It's hard.
You get a testing snack. You get a little snack to get your brain working.
All of those things are really good. That's not to knock that, but it just goes to show that the hoops by which online schools have to go through to administer state tests are incredible. And it astonishes me every year that our amazing school leaders are actually able to do this and meet that 95% or above threshold, and they do it consistently. And it's an arduous effort, logistical challenges. But I know Kevin Chavis, again, our president of schools, wrote a piece a couple of years ago for the 74, where he said, it could be a typical day for taking state tests in a traditional school, but it is a nightmare to try to pull this off. And for families to ask them to have to sometimes take vacation days to be able to drive their students out 60 miles away to go take state tests over multiple days. And imagine if you have 3 or 4 kids. It makes it even worse. I mean, this is not to sort of for excuses. It's just to say that there are so many different characteristics of this model of schooling that not a lot of people understand and know that are important to sort of call out, which is kind of gets to the point when you talk about regulations and you talk about new policies. This is why it should be done in collaboration with practitioners, with the teachers, the school leaders who've been doing this for years, who understand that policy can have, they sound good, may be very well intentioned, but can have very bad impacts downstream and could really impact their ability to be able to serve students in the way that they know is best. And I think the struggle we've had is so much policy around virtual schooling has been done without collaboration from folks in the online school community. And that is, honestly, it's quite offensive. It's offensive because they should be looking to the experts, the people who are actually working with the parents and the kids every single day to find out what works and how can it work. And we're advancing good policy. We frankly have been pushing on orientations and onboarding policies, engagement policies, and other things that reflect what parents want, what students need, and what we know school leaders feel is going to set them up for success. Not arbitrary enrollment restrictions, not caps, not removing virtuals from the charter school sector entirely, not auto closure policies based solely on, a single mark of graduation rate or someone to take state test scores, and so forth. So those are the kind of things that we do every day. And obviously now with the coronavirus, and the new, importance that online schooling is going to take in public education, it's important to get these policies right and to not impact or hurt families and teachers, and frankly, school districts that are going to be moving into the online education space.
I mean, there's just so many problems with this idea of top-down, quote-unquote, accountability. I wish we would all just stop calling it accountability, because it's not true accountability. Right? It's just standard test score, and it's only applied to one sector. That's another issue, right? When the government schools perform really well on standardized test score, nothing really happens. Sometimes they get more money. When the virtual charter schools don't get a really high test score, then the government prevents kids from choosing them. But the reality is the virtual schools and the charter schools are actually accountable in the true sense of the word from the bottom up, that if they lose their customers, they go out of business, right? Just how every other industry is held accountable in the United States and the rest of the world. People choose the product that they're satisfied with. And that part of that decision may have something to do with standardized test scores, but it may also have to do with a lot of the things that you mentioned earlier: bullying, safety, a lot of the negative socialization that can happen. And then also there's no guarantee that the test scores are better in the government school that the kids residentially assigned to. And then also, obviously, I mean, you're looking at like the Credo studies and then other evaluation systems. A lot of the times, they don't control perfectly for the differences in students between schools. So they can punish a school just for serving disadvantaged kids.
So that's a point I actually want to touch on real quick, Corey, because we need to drill down on that a little bit. A lot of these school districts, and maybe a lot is the wrong proportion, maybe it's all, I don't know. But a lot of these school districts push kids out of their system that they know are not on track to graduate to a virtual school, because let's offload the kids that aren't performing, because they also, in some cases, are paid by performance, and they're certainly graded by the state. So even if they're not paid for performance, they want to keep their ratings high, right? The grades. So if they push them out into virtual schools, they push them out into credit recovery programs, they push them out into second chance schools, and then they criticize organizations like K12 Inc, like Connections Academy, whatever.
That gets to another issue is the hypocrisy here, and a lot of the people who defend the government school system hate standardized test scores when it comes to when you're applying the standardized test scores to the government schools, trying to say that's evidence of failure. They say, oh no, kids are more than test scores. People don't care about test scores, which I agree with, but then they turn around and say, oh, we need to shut down the virtual schools because of X, Y, or Z test score in this particular area, which is, you see Diane Ravitch doing it all the time. She hates standardized test scores, but at the same time, in the same essay, a paragraph after railing against standardized test scores, will say, oh, look, there's some charter schools that have low test scores. We should shut them down.
Right.
Yeah, I react to that. A couple things too. I think you might see that even more so now, because a lot of folks have been talking about, regulating online schools. They might be running online schools here for the next year, perhaps two. And you wonder how excited they'll be about all of the myriad of regulations that they put on these schools, and actually seeing if they can or not. But I will say,
I just did that study in Pennsylvania that I brought up when you were talking about the safety outcomes, finding that virtual charter schools have a lot less safety problems, obviously, because they're not around a bunch of other students. But I tried to get data from the Pennsylvania Department of Education on their cyber programs in the government school system. They don't even report the test scores separately for the students enrolled in cyber programs in the government schools. And I think that's because if that data were available, we could make better comparisons between the virtual charters in Pennsylvania and then the cyber program students in the government schools. That would be a more apples to apples comparison, right? But because that's not even available, we can't even make those comparisons. And I think it's a way to escape their own accountability mechanisms that they use against the virtual charter schools.
We need to insert a Michael Malice quote right here, don't we? Like,
yeah,
you know it better than I do about.
I mean, well, yeah, schools are one of the only places that many students or people will ever experience violence in their lives. And I mean, yeah, this gets to the point that people are choosing virtual schools to get away from those kinds of things. And I think that outweighs the costs that come with lower standardized test scores. Look, people care. Go ahead.
I cannot tell you how many times we've done focus groups where we've talked with families and open-ended. Tell us what you read of the school. What do you care most about, and so forth. State tests are not high on that list if they make it at all. What comes across is the mom who's crying and says, "You saved my child's life. If I didn't get my child out of this school, and put her into your school and your program where she could focus, she was away from the bullying or whatever it may be, she would have died. She would have taken her own life." We've heard that many times, and that's not every student, to be sure, but
that could be the 301st student you were talking about.
That hits you hard, right? And that's what wakes us up and wants us to get out there and say, you know what, this should be about the individual family, about what they need at that time. And look, I do want to say this about the state test scores, though, because we don't view these as illegitimate, right? We know they are very important to help to measure, but when they're used as a bludgeon to shut down options, restrict choice, then it becomes a problem from my standpoint. That's my personal view on it. But we also take academics very seriously, and I know our CEO Nate Davis, president of schools Kevin Chavis, have made that the number one priority, and we're seeing progress. We're doing a lot of assessments internally as well too, and our goal is to ensure that students can make growth no matter how long they've been with us, whether it's for half a year or for the duration of their K-12 experience. And we're putting more investment resources into academic outcomes for our students and teacher training and all of the above. But the types of assessments, I think, that make most sense are the ones that inform instruction. And when you get state test results, when they come back 6 months from now, from the time that students are taking tests, it doesn't really help to inform instruction. The assessments that we're doing across these touch points throughout the course of the school year help teachers know what needs to be, what they need to focus on, what a student needs to learn, where we need to put in interventions on, and that's our primary focus. And I just wanted to sort of clarify, because I think a lot of times when we talk about the challenges around accountability, a lot of people like to write it up as, they're just providing excuses, and that's not the case at all. The schools that we serve hold us accountable as a provider, and we hold ourselves to high standards as well too. And our goal is to show improvement and help the students as we see fit. But at the same time, we don't believe that's a reason to shut off access to arbitrarily prevent families from accessing what could be their only school choice that they have.
I think that's an important distinction to make, that what matters is how that information is being used. Is it being used to present information to parents so that they can make more, better informed decisions about the types of schools that they want their children to attend? Or is it being used by the government to protect their monopoly and restrict access to virtual charter schools and to, make those decisions essentially for parents by not allowing them to choose a particular school? I think that's completely different from this bottom-up approach where you provide the information.
I do sometimes chuckle at a lot of people who think they know what parents want, and sometimes either write about it, it's just sort of wonks out there in our world who sort of say, this is what parents want. This is what parents say, need and so forth. But, one of the things working with a company like K12 is we actually have a direct dial to these families. We're talking to them all the time. We're, the enrollment counselors that we work with here, oftentimes they almost sometimes can act like counselors themselves to the families, so calling up saying, I don't know what I can do. I don't know what I need something. My child is struggling, hurting. So we have been long advocates for providing parents as much information as possible to make the greatest, most informed choice. But we also be responsive to the needs of the families and the desires that they have and the expectations they have for the schools that they serve. So we're trying to balance that. But policy is made outside of any informed view of what parents want or the expectations that they have for the schools that they're in, then it's a recipe for disaster. It's going to create all sorts of unintended consequences. And I think we see that a lot. Listening to the voices of parents is so important. I think we're going to see that even more so now as parents are going to be making choices based upon health and safety with COVID. And maybe and hopefully it'll snap a lot of folks back to reality that really this is the primary audience that we need to listen to and that we need to set policy around, right? To help, so to give parents much more freedom, more flexibility, and more opportunity to get the education that they believe is best for their child.
So I have another question, but before I transition, I want to point out this survey that Jason Bedrick from EdChoice and Lindsay Burke did. This was they asked parents why they chose particular private schools in Florida. I think they surveyed over 13,000, and if you look close enough, you can see that standardized test scores were one of the lowest things on why the families were opting out of their residentially assigned schools and picking something else. They cared more about things like safe environment, like Jeff was saying, morals and values instruction. Academic reputation was there, but the parents didn't see that as being the same thing as something that shows up on a standardized test. And so I think this really shows that there's a disconnect between academics and what standardized tests actually capture. Jeff, I also noticed that when the schools were closing down at the beginning of all of this in March, wasn't K12 Inc. Providing some free services to help during the crisis? And I don't remember exactly what it was, but could you go over some of how that happened?
Yeah, thanks. And those are still ongoing in many areas. Credit to our educators and our team of educators at K12, school leaders, teachers, who really all rallied and said, there's going to be a huge need right now for our expertise, our knowledge, and support. And so, and credit to our leadership at our company for doing that as well too. And I know many others did as well too. Those big bad for-profit providers. But what we did is we provided a number of resources free, both teacher training, curriculum and content for school districts. We provided our platform and our curriculum free for a period of time, and a host of other different things as well too. Reduced tuition for private schools that we have, and so forth. And like I said, much of that is continuing today. And I will say this: I know there's a lot of this discussion centered around the charter schools and the choice side, and that's incredibly important, no doubt. But we do extensive work with school districts, over 2,000 across the country, and we hope to do more. We probably will be, and there's been some great conversations that we're having with school districts about trying to find solutions, not just near term, right, to deal with the problems of coronavirus, school closures, and so forth, but long term, disaster preparedness, but even more so, just setting up programs that can meet the diverse needs of their student body, online and blended school programs and hybrid programs and so forth. And to do it in a way that helps them, uses their own teachers, their own resources, and ensures that they have minimal impact, financial impact, from what will likely be a very difficult, year or two with state budgets. And And so we're very proud of the work that we do there, and we're really set up to be able to help serve those school districts. So sometimes, you have that natural tension that may exist between school districts and the charter school side or the choice side of online learning. But at the same time, too, there's great opportunity for partnership, and that's something we really want to build on. So we're talking to small school districts, suburban school districts, rural school districts, and large school districts who are looking for quality solutions and operational support as well too. Again, you get to the term quality. How do you define quality? Is it defined narrowly, based simply upon state tests, or is it defined based upon its operational success, its ability to be able to provide comprehensive curriculum, teacher training, instruction, wraparound support service, special education? We didn't even talk about that. We serve 15,000 plus kids with disabilities, and we do it very well with high parent satisfaction. And we've helped to transition students from face-to-face to online modalities for their services. So all of that really matters to school districts as they're going through this challenge right now. And so we're proud of the fact that, yes, we're going to stand by the right of parents to be able to make choices. Yes, we're going to stand by our school partners who offer multi-district online or online charter schools and that are served 100% by school choice. But at the same time, we are going to work just as hard to help our district partners be set up for success, both near term and long term. And I think that's the value that like providers like K12 can bring and others out there. And hopefully it gets to sort of people rethinking the importance of online schools in the fabric of public education.
That's great. Well, we're just over the 1 hour mark, Jeff, and you've been generous with your time today. We appreciate you jumping on and talking with us about virtual schools. K12 Inc. is who Jeff Kwitowski is with, Senior Vice President there. We appreciate your time today. And let's keep the conversation going in the comments. If anyone has any questions or comments, we'll be sure to jump in and answer any of those over the next few hours today and maybe even through the weekend if anyone has any thoughts or questions there. So thanks again, Jeff. We really appreciate you coming on.
Matthew, Corey, great to be with you. I really enjoyed it.
Great.
All right. And until next time, we'll see all of you guys. Thanks for joining us on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. We'll be back with you, I believe, on Monday to discuss some more things. But again, thank you so much, Jeff. It was great talking with you for over an hour, and it was great to see everybody in the comments. So again, let's continue the conversation offline. Thank you.
Thanks.